K.O. Miller sat alone at his worn-out kitchen table, the dim glow of a single overhead bulb casting shadows across the room. His fingers trembled as they traced the outline of a small, delicate earring resting in his palm, a silver butterfly with tiny blue stones embedded in its wings. It was the last tangible connection to his daughter, Grace, who had vanished without a trace 10 years earlier. The house, once filled with laughter and life, now felt like a tomb. Dust clung to shelves, and unopened letters piled up near the door. K.O. had let everything else go, but not her memory. He couldn't. He closed his eyes, hearing echoes of her voice, innocent and full of dreams. He saw her twirling in the living room, the earring catching the light as she spun. And then, as always, the image shattered, replaced by the hollow ache of her absence. The clock ticked mercilessly. He exhaled and stood, pulling on his jacket. The cold metal of the earring pressed against his palm before he gently tucked it into his pocket. The grocery store wasn't far, but K.O. took his time. He'd stopped rushing years ago. What was the point? People came and went, pushing carts and chatting on phones, but he felt invisible among them. He scanned the shelves half-heartedly, tossing a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs into his basket. As he approached the checkout line, his gaze drifted toward the registers. And then he saw her. K.O. froze. The girl at the register looked up, her eyes briefly locking with his. His breath hitched. She was the spitting image of Grace, the same hazel eyes, the same dimples that lit up her cheeks when she smiled politely at the customer ahead of him. His heart pounded in his chest as he shuffled forward. She wore her hair in a ponytail, just like Grace had done on the day she disappeared. But what made his knees buckle was the earring glinting from her left ear. A silver butterfly, the exact match to the one tucked inside his pocket. His hands began to sweat. He gripped the handle of the basket as if it might anchor him to reality. "Sir?" Her voice snapped him back. He stepped up to the register, struggling to form words as she scanned his items. "That earring," he finally said, his voice cracking. She paused, glancing up. "Excuse me?" K.O. swallowed. "Your earring. Where did you get it?" The girl hesitated, her brow furrowing. "It was a gift, from my mom," she said cautiously. His vision blurred. "Are you sure?" "Are you?" He stopped himself. He could see the unease growing in her expression. "That'll be $12.57, she said, suddenly professional. K.O. fumbled for his wallet, his mind racing. He paid and gathered his bag, but he couldn't leave. "Not yet." "Sorry," he said, his voice softer. "It's just, you remind me of someone." The girl's expression softened, but only slightly. "I get that sometimes," she said, but her tone was guarded. K.O. nodded, backing away. He stood near the exit, pretending to check his phone while keeping her in his peripheral vision. She didn't look at him again. But as he walked out into the cold night, the image of her face, and that earring, was burned into his mind. K.O. stepped out of the grocery store, the cold night air stinging his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts raced, replaying the brief exchange with the girl at the register. Lily. That was the name on her name tag. He paced in the parking lot, clutching the plastic bag in one hand and the earring in his pocket with the other. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible. Grace was gone, lost to a decade of unanswered questions and dead-end investigations. But his heart wouldn't let it go. The earring. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. K.O.'s pulse quickened. He turned back toward the glass doors, glimpsing Lily through the window as she scanned another customer's items. He wanted to go back in, to ask more questions, but what could he possibly say that wouldn't make him sound unhinged? Instead, he lingered outside, waiting until her shift ended. The minutes dragged. K.O.'s nerves were fraying, and he questioned whether he'd crossed a line, whether his desperation was clouding his judgment. Just as he was about to walk away, he saw her step outside. Lily wore a light jacket, shivering as she adjusted the strap of her bag. She didn't notice him at first. But when he moved closer, her eyes flicked toward him, and she slowed. "Hey," Ko said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Her expression hardened. "Are you following me?" "No. I mean, no, not like that," he stammered, raising his hands in defense. I need to ask you something." Her hand moved toward her phone, fingers tightening around it. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please." Ko took a careful step back, giving her space. "It's about the earring. The one you're wearing." Lily's eyebrows furrowed. "What about it?" Ko hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "It's exactly like one I gave my daughter years ago." Her shoulders tensed. "Look, I don't know you, okay? And I don't think I want to." She turned to leave. "Wait." Ko's voice cracked, raw with desperation. She froze. "I'm sorry. I know this sounds crazy, but you look just like her. My daughter. Grace. She's been missing for 10 years. Lily's expression shifted, less fear now, more confusion. "Missing?" Ko nodded. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I need to know where you got that earring." Lily glanced down at it, her fingers brushing against the silver butterfly. "My mom gave it to me," she said softly. "She said it was special." "Your mom?" Ko pressed. "Carol Carter." Ko swallowed hard. The name meant nothing to him, but something about Lily's hesitation lingered in his mind. "Did she ever tell you where it came from?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "I never asked. It's just a gift." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension hung thick in the air. Finally, Lily stepped back. "I need to go." Ko didn't try to stop her this time. He watched as she walked toward the far end of the parking lot and climbed into a rusty sedan. His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. As her car pulled away, Ko clenched the earring in his pocket. Whether Lily knew it or not, she was part of the story. He could feel it. Ko lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound in the house. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Lily, the way her eyes mirrored Grace's, the slight tilt of her head, and, most of all, the earring. He rolled over, reaching for the small wooden box on the nightstand. Inside, nestled among faded photographs and scraps of paper, was the matching earring. He turned it over in his fingers, tracing the edges. It was impossible for it to be a coincidence. Grace had worn those earrings on the day she disappeared. He remembered fastening them to her ears that morning before she ran off to catch the school bus. They had been a gift for her 8th birthday, and she'd insisted on wearing them every day. Ko sat up, pulling the box closer. He flipped through the old photos, each one a snapshot of a life that felt a million years away. There was Grace in her school uniform, her hair tied back in a ponytail. Another photo showed her on the swings, her laughter practically audible through the frozen image. He stopped at the last picture, the one taken just 2 days before she vanished. Her smile was wide, her eyes sparkling. Ko's chest tightened. That same light was in Lily's eyes. He grabbed his phone and began searching online. He typed Carol Carter into the search bar, followed by the name of the town. Dozens of results popped up, most irrelevant, but after several minutes, he found a local news article from about 10 years ago, a profile about Carol adopting a young girl after a tragic accident had left the child orphaned. His heart skipped. The article didn't include photos, but it mentioned that the girl had been found wandering near a rest stop, disoriented and unable to explain what had happened to her parents. He stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. Could it be her? Could it really be Grace? Ko knew he couldn't let it go. He needed answers. The next morning, he drove back to the grocery store. He waited in his truck, sipping stale coffee and watching the entrance. Lily's shift started at 9 a.m., and sure enough, she showed up right on time. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, but she greeted her coworkers with a polite smile before stepping inside. Ko didn't follow her this time. Instead, he waited until her lunch break, catching her just as she stepped outside with a sandwich and a soda. "Lily." She flinched at his voice but didn't walk away. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice gentler this time. "Please. Just 5 minutes." Lily hesitated but eventually nodded. 5 minutes. They sat at a nearby bench. Ko could see the tension in her shoulders, but she didn't move away when he pulled out the matching earring and held it up. Her eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "It belonged to my daughter," Ko said softly. "She disappeared 10 years ago. Her name was Grace." Lily stared at the earring, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to touch it but didn't dare. "I know this sounds crazy," he continued. "But you look just like her. And that earring, it's not a coincidence." Lily shook her head. "No. That doesn't make sense. I've lived here my whole life." "Are you sure?" Her gaze faltered. I don't remember much before I was adopted." Ko's stomach tightened. "Adopted?" She nodded slowly. "My mom, Carol, she told me my birth parents died in a car accident when I was little. I don't remember them." His heart raced. "What else did she tell you?" "That's it." Lily looked down at her hands. "I always thought it was weird that I couldn't remember anything, but I didn't question it." Ko leaned closer. "Lily, I need you to trust me. Let me help you figure this out. If I'm wrong, I'll leave you alone. But if I'm right..." She cut him off. "If you're right, then what?" "My whole life is a lie." Ko didn't have an answer for that. "I need time," she said, standing abruptly. Ko let her go, but as he watched her walk away, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, the faint hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. The earring felt heavier than it should as she turned it over in her fingers. She had taken it off the moment que chegou em casa, como se removlo pudesse dissipar as perguntas rodopiando msua mente. But it hadn't. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, soft reassurances about the car accident, the adoption papers, the second chance at life. Carol had never given her a reason to doubt the story. But now, doubts were all Lily had. The earring, the same earring, kept pulling her back to the man at the grocery store. Ko. His name was etched in her thoughts. He had looked broken, desperate, yet sincere. She knew she needed answers. The next day, Lily found herself dialing her mother's number. It rang twice before Carol answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "Yeah," Lily lied. She hesitated. "Actually, there's something I wanted to ask." "Sure, honey. What is it?" Lily took a breath. "That earring you gave me, the butterfly one. Where did you get it?" There was silence. Too long. "Mom?" I bought it at a flea market," Carol said finally. "Why?" It looks really old. I thought maybe it had some kind of story." "It doesn't," Carol said quickly. "It's just jewelry, Lily. Don't overthink it." But Lily couldn't ignore the tightness in her mother's voice. She knew that tone. Carol always used it when she was hiding something. "Okay," Lily said, letting the topic drop. But as soon as she hung up, her chest tightened. Carol was lying. That evening, Ko was sitting on the worn steps of his porch when Lily's car pulled up. He stood cautiously as she climbed out, arms folded and shoulders tense. "I shouldn't be here," she said, glancing around as if someone might see her. "I'm glad you came." She hesitated before stepping closer. "I need you to be honest with me. What exactly do you think happened to your daughter?" Ko motioned for her to sit, and after a moment, she did, just far enough away to keep some distance. "Her name is Grace," he began, his voice low and steady. "She was 8 years old when she disappeared. One morning, she got on the bus to school, and she never came home." Lily's eyes flickered with emotion, but she didn't interrupt. We searched everywhere. The police thought maybe she'd been taken, but there were no witnesses, no evidence. Eventually, the case went cold. Ko paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. But I never stopped looking. Lily exhaled slowly. And you think I might be her? You're wearing her earring, he said simply. She looked down at the earring in her hand, biting her lip. My mom said it came from a flea market. Ko shook his head. That's not true. How do you know? Because I bought those earrings myself, years ago. Custom made. There's no way there's another pair like them. Lily's face paled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if the words had been stolen from her. Lily, if there's even a chance, Ko leaned forward. You deserve to know the truth. Tears welled in her eyes. What if I'm not ready for the truth? Then I'll wait, Ko said softly. Lily wiped her eyes and stood. I need to talk to my mom again. She left before he could say anything else, leaving Ko alone on the porch, the night pressing in around him. But this time, he didn't feel hopeless. For the first time in 10 years, he felt like he was one step closer to finding grace. Lily's fingers trembled as ela giru achave na fechadura de porta de frente. The house was dim, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the living room. Carol sat in her usual spot on the couch, a book resting in her lap. You're home late, Carol said, looking up with a soft smile. Yeah, Lily replied, her voice tight. She hesitated in the doorway, her pulse quickening. Carol noticed. What's wrong, honey? Lily stepped farther into the room and gripped the edge of the counter for balance. Mom. I need you to tell me the truth. Carol blinked, her smile fading. What are you talking about? The earring, Lily said, holding it up. Where did it really come from? Carol's eyes darted to the jewelry and then back to Lily's face. I already told you. A flea market. No, you didn't, Lily said, her voice rising. You lied. I know you did. Carol set the book aside and stood slowly. Lily, what's going on? Why are you suddenly asking all these questions? Because I met someone, Lily snapped. A man named Cale Miller. He says his daughter disappeared 10 years ago, and this was her earring. Carol froze. The silence was deafening. Lily's heart pounded as she watched her mother's face pale. Say something, Lily demanded. Carol's voice trembled. I was trying to protect you. Lily staggered back a step. Protect me? From what? Carol reached out, but Lily pulled away. From the truth, Carol said, her voice breaking. You don't understand what it was like when I found you. Found me? Lily's breath caught. What does that mean? Carol sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't plan for it to happen this way. I didn't plan for any of it. Mom, just tell me, Lily said, her voice cracking. Carol finally looked up, her eyes wet with tears. You weren't abandoned, Lily. You were taken. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lily's knees threatened to buckle. Taken? I found you at a rest stop late at night. You were alone, crying. You didn't remember your name or where you came from. I tried to do the right thing. I called the police, but no one ever claimed you. I couldn't leave you. I adopted you because I thought I could give you a better life. Lily's chest tightened. But you never told me. Why? Because I was afraid, Carol whispered. Afraid someone would come and take you away. I never meant to lie to you. You let me believe a lie for 10 years. Lily shouted. Carol flinched but didn't deny it. Lily turned away, pacing in the small space. Her mind spun. The rest stop. The lack of memories. It all fit, but it didn't make the truth any easier to face. She grabbed her coat. Where are you going? Carol asked, panic in her voice. To find out who I really am. Ko opened his door to find Lily standing there, her eyes red but fierce. "Tell me everything," she said. He led her inside, his hands shaking as he reached for the box he'd shown her before. He pulled out the matching earring and placed it beside hers. They were identical. "I need more," Lily said, her voice almost pleading. Ko opened another folder, this one filled with missing person flyers. He handed her one with Grace's smiling face on it. "That's me," Lily whispered. Ko knelt beside her. "I don't know how this happened, but I promise you, I will help you find the answers." Lily wiped her eyes. "We need proof." "There's one way to know for sure," Ko said carefully. "A DNA test." Lily hesitated but finally nodded. "Let's do it." The next morning, they went to the clinic. The nurse took samples, and as they left, Lily felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. "What if it's not true?" she asked. Ko looked at her, his expression resolute. "Then I'll walk away. But if it is, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Lily swallowed hard and looked out the car window. For the first time, she wasn't sure what she wanted the answer to be. Lily sat in Ko's truck, her fingers tapping nervously against the dashboard. The hum of the engine filled the silence as they waited for the results. She didn't know which was worse, the possibility of Ko being wrong or the possibility of him being right. Ko glanced at her, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "You don't have to stay here if it's too much. I can call you when the results come in." "No," Lily said firmly. "I need to know now." Ko nodded, respecting her determination. But the tension between them was palpable. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, Lily finally spoke. "If this turns out to be true, what happens next?" Ko hesitated. "We deal with it. Together." Lily opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot drew their attention. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop near the entrance. Ko frowned. "Stay here." Before Lily could argue, he stepped out of the truck and approached the SUV. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his movements precise and deliberate. Ko's heart sank as recognition hit him. David Green. David's eyes flicked toward Lily through the windshield before settling back on Ko. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Ko said, his voice low. "Oh, I think there is." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been stirring up trouble, Ko. Digging in places you shouldn't." Ko stepped closer, lowering his voice. "She's my daughter, isn't she?" David's smile faded. "You don't want to go down this road. Some things are better left buried." "Not this," Ko snapped. "I won't stop until I know the truth." David leaned in, his voice cold. "Then you'd better watch your back." Lily pushed open the door and stepped out of the truck. "Who is he?" Ko turned, but David was already walking away, climbing back into the SUV. The vehicle sped off, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. "Who was that?" Lily demanded. "Someone who doesn't want us to find the truth," Ko said, his jaw clenched. Lily's face paled. "Why would he care?" "Because someone took you," Ko said quietly. "And he knows why." Later that night, Ko sat in his living room, spreading papers and photos across the table. Lily paced behind him, her anxiety growing. "That guy," Lily said, stopping abruptly. "He knew me. I could see it in his face." "I know," Ko said, flipping through documents. "And I think he's connected to how you disappeared." Lily sank onto the couch, burying her head in her hands. "I can't believe this is happening." Ko sat beside her. "I need you to trust me. No matter what we find, I'll protect you." Lily nodded, but her eyes were filled with fear. The next morning, Lily arrived at work early, hoping to distract herself. But the feeling of being watched gnawed at her. Every time the doors opened, she glanced up, half expecting to see David walk in. At lunchtime, she stepped outside to breathe, but the air felt heavy. Across the parking lot, the black SUV was back. Her heart raced. She grabbed her phone and called Ko. "It's him," she said the moment he answered. "Stay inside," Ko said sharply. "I'm on my way." But before Lily could move, the SUV door opened, and David stepped out. He approached slowly, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Lily," he said, his voice smooth. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," she snapped, stepping back. He held up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to clear up some misunderstandings." "I don't believe you." David's expression hardened. "You should. Because there are things you don't know, things that could destroy you and Ko if you keep digging." Lily's stomach churned. "Who are you?" "I'm the one who made sure you had a life," David said. "But I can take that life away just as easily." A horn blared as Ko's truck screeched into the lot. David stepped back, but his eyes locked with Ko's. "This isn't over," he said before turning and slipping back into the SUV. Ko jumped out of the truck and ran to Lily. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "Who is he?" she asked again. Ko exhaled. "Someone who knows more than he's letting on. But we'll figure this out." Lily looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "What if we're too late?" Ko's eyes hardened. "We're not." Lily sat curled up on her bed, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. Sleep had become impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, David's words echoed in her head. "I can take that life away just as easily." She shivered, hugging her knees. The fear wasn't just about what he might do, it was the deeper fear that he knew something she didn't. Something that could unravel the fragile reality she was barely holding together. Her phone buzzed. She reached for it, expecting Ko's name to appear, but it was Carol. Her stomach dropped. She hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." Carol's voice was tight. "Where have you been? You didn't come home last night." "I stayed at a friend's." "Which friend?" Carol's tone sharpened. Lily's throat tightened. "I can't do this right now." "Yes, you can," Carol snapped. "You need to come home. We need to talk." Lily swallowed hard. "I'm not ready." "Not ready for what?" "For the truth? Or to face the fact that the man filling your head with lies is dangerous?" Tears burned at Lily's eyes. "Maybe the lies didn't come from him." Carol's voice softened. "Honey, I raised you. I loved you. Don't throw that away." "I'm not," Lily whispered. "I just need to know who I am." The line went silent for a long moment before Carol finally said, "Then you're on your own." The call disconnected, leaving Lily staring at the screen, her heart pounding. The next morning, Ko found Lily sitting outside the clinic, the DNA results envelope clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't look up when he sat down beside her. "Did you open it?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm too scared." Ko placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever it says, you're not alone." Lily exhaled shakily and tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the words, and her breath caught. 99.9% match. Her hands trembled. "It's true." Ko leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your Grace." The world seemed to tilt. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of the truth settled on her shoulders. "What do I do now?" Ko's voice was steady. "We go to the police. We reopen the investigation. And we make sure no one gets away with what happened to you." Lily nodded, but her chest tightened with fear. "What if he stops us? What if David?" "He won't," Ko said firmly. "I'll protect you." That night, Lily decided to return home to pack some of her things. She had spent her whole life in that house, and leaving felt like closing a door she wasn't ready to shut. But as she pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. The porch light was off, and the curtains were drawn, something Carol never did. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. "Mom?" Silence. She crept through the darkened living room and up the stairs, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. When she reached her bedroom, her breath caught. Her drawers had been emptied, and clothes were scattered across the floor. The framed photo of her and Carol was shattered, the glass shards glinting in the faint moonlight. Her pulse raced. She turned to leave, but a shadow moved at the top of the stairs. David. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice low and menacing. Lily froze. What are you doing here? I told you to stop digging, he said, stepping closer. You should have listened. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Get out. David's eyes narrowed. Not until you understand what's at stake. Before he could take another step, headlights flashed through the window, and the sound of tires screeching against the pavement broke the tension. Lily. Keo's voice boomed from outside. David stepped back, his eyes darting toward the door. This isn't over. Then he disappeared down the stairs and out the back door. Keo burst through the front entrance, his eyes wild. Are you okay? Lily collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He was here, she choked out. Keo's jaw clenched. He's not going to hurt you. I promise. But as he looked around the ransacked room, he knew David wasn't finished yet. Lily sat in the passenger seat of Keo's truck, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The adrenaline from the night before had faded, leaving her drained and hollow. Keo drove in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Neither of them had slept, and the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Where are we going? Lily finally asked. To see Alan, Keo said. If anyone can figure out who David really is, it's him. Alan Moore's office was dimly lit and cluttered with files, coffee cups, and old case reports. The retired detective greeted them with a nod and motioned for them to sit. Tell me everything, Alan said, leaning back in his chair. Keo recounted the events of the last few days, meeting Lily, the DNA test, and David's threats. Alan's eyes darkened as the story unfolded. I remember the case, Alan said finally, rubbing his jaw. Grace's disappearance haunted me for years. But this changes everything. He turned to his desk, shuffling through folders until he found what he was looking for, a faded police report with Grace's name printed across the top. There's something you need to know, Alan said, his voice low. About David Green. Lily leaned forward. Who is he? He was a private investigator, hired by families to track down missing children. Alan paused. But somewhere along the way, he stopped looking for the truth and started covering it up. Lily's stomach churned. What do you mean? Alan sighed. David was connected to a black market adoption ring. He didn't just find children, he helped them disappear. And if he's involved in this, then your disappearance wasn't random. Keo clenched his fists. You're saying he sold her? Alan nodded grimly. Or someone paid him to make sure she was never found. Lily's breath caught. Carol, she whispered. Alan's eyes softened. We don't know her role in this yet. But if she adopted you through illegal channels, she may have been more of a victim than you realize. Lily looked down, her mind spinning. She wanted to hate Carol for lying, but part of her still longed for the mother who had raised her. What do we do now? Keo asked. Alan closed the folder. We bring this to the authorities. And we find David before he can disappear again. That night, Lily and Keo returned to his house. The tension was suffocating, and every shadow outside the window felt like a threat. Lily paced the living room while Keo double-checked the locks. He won't give up, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I won't let him touch you, Keo replied. But even as he said the words, Lily could see the worry in his eyes. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering erupted from the kitchen. Get down! Keo shouted, pushing Lily behind the couch. David's voice rang out from the shadows. You should have walked away, Keo. Keo grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the door and stepped into the kitchen. David stood near the broken window, his eyes cold and calculating. "It's over," Ko said. "The police are on their way." David smirked. "You really think they'll believe you? A desperate father and a confused girl? I've covered my tracks better than you can imagine." But before David could move, Lily stepped out from behind the couch, her voice steady. "You don't control me anymore." David turned toward her, his expression flickering with surprise. "You lied to me," Lily said, her voice trembling but firm. "You stole me from my family." David's smirk faltered. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do," she shot back. "And so do the police." Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, and the sound of sirens filled the air. David's face darkened as he backed away, but Ko blocked the door. "Don't move," Ko warned. The front door burst open, and officers swarmed in, pinning David to the ground. "It's over," Ko said again, but this time, the words felt real. Later that night, Lily sat beside Ko on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. "I should feel better," she said softly. "But I don't." Ko placed an arm around her. "It's going to take time. You've been through more than anyone should have to." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think she loved me, Carol?" Ko hesitated. "I think she did. But love doesn't excuse what she did." Lily closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know who I am anymore." "You're Grace," Ko said. "And no matter what happens next, I'll be here." For the first time in days, Lily let herself believe him. The morning light filtered through the windows, soft and warm, but Lily still felt the weight of the previous night pressing down on her chest. She sat at the kitchen table in Ko's house, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but reflective. Neither had slept much after David's arrest. The questions, the fear, and the memories had kept them awake. "You should eat something," Ko said gently, setting a plate of toast in front of her. "I'm not hungry." "You have to keep your strength up." Lily managed a faint smile, but it quickly faded. "What happens now?" Ko exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Alan said the police are working to tie David to the adoption ring. They're reopening the investigation into your disappearance." "Into Grace's disappearance," Lily corrected. Ko flinched at the name, but nodded. "Grace," he said softly. She traced the rim of her mug. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're still you," Ko said, moving closer. "The name doesn't change that." Lily looked up, her eyes searching his. "I don't know if I can be her, Grace. I've been Lily for so long. Carol's daughter." Ko's expression softened. "You don't have to decide right now. We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Her lips trembled. "What if I'm not enough? What if I can't live up to who you thought I was?" "You don't have to," Ko said firmly. "You're enough just as you are." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached across the table, and Ko took her hand, squeezing it gently. Later that day, Lily returned to Carol's house one last time. She stood at the door for several minutes before knocking. Carol opened it, her eyes red and tired. She didn't speak at first, just stepped aside to let Lily in. The house felt smaller than Lily remembered, as if the walls were closing in. "I didn't think you'd come back," Carol said quietly. "I almost didn't." Carol sat down on the couch, wringing her hands. "I know you probably hate me." Lily shook her head. "I don't hate you." Carol looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared of losing you. I thought if I told the truth, you'd be taken away." "You were wrong," Lily said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "You didn't protect me, you stole me from my real family." Carol flinched, but nodded. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that." Lily sat beside her. "I don't know if I can forgive you either. But I loved you. I still do." Carol broke down, and Lily let her cry. It didn't erase the pain, but it brought a fragile sense of closure. That evening, Lily returned to Keo's house. She found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. "It's done," she said, sitting beside him. "How did it go?" "As well as it could." She leaned back, breathing in the cool air. "I told her I can't forget what she did. But I also can't forget that she raised me." Keo nodded. "That's fair." Lily turned to him. "Do you think she'll go to jail?" "I don't know," he admitted. "The police will decide what happens next." They sat in silence for a long time before Lily spoke again. "What about us?" Keo looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do we do now?" He smiled faintly. "We take it one day at a time. We figure out how to rebuild. Together." Lily nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'd like that." Days passed, and Lily started to feel like she could breathe again. She spent hours going through the memories Keo had saved, photos, drawings, and letters Grace had written as a child. Some felt familiar, others didn't, but each one helped her piece together who she used to be. She still didn't have all the answers, and she knew it would take time to feel whole. But for the first time in years, she felt grounded. She wasn't lost anymore. Keo stood in the doorway, watching her sift through the box of memories. "You ready to let this be your story?" he asked. Lily smiled softly. "Not yet. But I'm ready to start writing a new one." The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Lily stood in the backyard of Keo's house, her fingers grazing the edge of the silver butterfly earring dangling from her ear. The matching earring rested in a small box on the patio table, a symbol of the past she was finally learning to face. Keo stepped outside, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "You okay?" Lily turned and smiled softly. "Yeah. I think I am." They sat down on the wooden steps, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant birds filling the silence. "I went back to the police station today," Keo said. "Alan called. They're charging David with kidnapping and trafficking." Lily exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "Good. He doesn't deserve to walk free." Keo hesitated. "Carol, too. She's under investigation, but it's complicated." Lily looked away, her jaw tightening. "I know she made the wrong choices, but part of me still loves her." "Is that crazy?" "No," Keo said, placing his hand over hers. "It's not crazy at all." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I feel guilty. She gave me a life, but it wasn't really mine. And now I'm standing here with you, trying to be Grace, but I don't know how." Keo squeezed her hand. "You don't have to be Grace. You just have to be you." Lily wiped her eyes and managed a small laugh. "You're really bad at inspirational speeches." He smiled. "I'm out of practice." Later that evening, they drove to the cemetery. Keo had asked if she wanted to visit Grace's mother's grave, and Lily had agreed, though she wasn't sure how she'd feel standing there. They walked quietly to the simple headstone that bore her name, Amanda Miller. Keo knelt down, brushing away the leaves that had gathered at the base. "She would have loved you," he said softly. Lily's throat tightened. "I wish I remembered her." Keo reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It showed Amanda holding Grace in her arms, her smile wide and full of life. "She sang to you every night," he said, his voice trembling. "Even when she was tired. And she always kissed you on the forehead before you fell asleep." Lily traced the edges of the photo, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I wish I'd had more time with her." Keo nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence for a long time before Lily reached into her bag and pulled out the small jewelry box containing the matching earring. She knelt down and placed it beside the headstone. "She'd want you to have it," Keo said. Lily shook her head. "No. She'd want me to move forward." As they drove home, the air felt lighter. Lily rested her head against the window, watching the trees blur past. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was running. A week later, Lily stood at the edge of the lake near Kayo's house, her toes dipping into the water. She had decided to stay, at least for now. The idea of starting over somewhere else felt overwhelming, and Kayo had offered her a place to figure things out. "Ready?" Kayo called from behind her. She turned, smiling. "Ready." They released 2 balloons into the sky, one pink, one blue. It was something Kayo said he'd always wanted to do for Grace, but never could bring himself to. As the balloons floated higher, Lily whispered, "Goodbye, Grace." Kayo looked at her, his eyes filled with pride. "And hello, Lily." She smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt free.